Hello, and welcome to Module 3, Helping Students Access Complex Texts. I'm Dr. Angie Gunter, and I'm happy to be walking you through this important portion of the TextSet microcredential process. In Modules 1 and 2, we focused on why providing students with complex text is so important, and how to measure appropriate text complexity. Students will not advance as readers if we don't present them with complex texts and guide them through ways of processing them. But when we consider this list of key features of complex text, it might feel like a daunting task to prepare students in our classrooms to successfully make sense of reading that meets these criteria. So let's move forward to our objective of determining what instructional moves we can incorporate to help students navigate challenging text. You may have seen this graphic with some pretty eye-opening statistics meant to convey the importance of reading to students and parents. Clearly, the exposure to words is a benefit to those who read frequently, particularly when you consider that uncommon vocabulary is essentially a roadblock for students, hindering their understanding of text that may be riddled with unfamiliar terminology. So reading more is certainly important. However, not all high-volume reading is equally effective. Studies have revealed that students acquire vocabulary up to 4 times faster when they read a series of related texts versus reading the same number of unrelated texts. In fact, reading related text grows knowledge and vocabulary far faster than any other approach. Consider how content area units are designed around topics or phenomena in science, or chronological studies and historical events in social studies. It just makes sense because students are able to put their learning in context. But, not all reading curricula is set up that way. If you'll remember in Module 1, we read an article describing the teaching of reading strategies in isolation using different unrelated texts, not helping students build knowledge and vocabulary systematically within a defined or extended context. To illustrate, we're going to take part in a simulation of how effective vocabulary acquisition occurs through encountering a word in different contexts. Consider this word, excrescence. It's not a really common word. Most people don't use it every day, so we'll use it for our simulation. We have 4 pictures related to excrescence, but we're going to read a text using the word and try to determine a definition by using context clues. I'll read the first. To calculate fuel efficiency, the aerospace engineers needed an accurate estimation of excrescence drag caused by the shape of the plane's cabin. Now, pause the webcast, reread the text, and in question 1 in the Think session, write what you think the word excrescence might mean. Continue the webcast after you've written your response. Now here's the second text. Excrescences on the valves of the heart have been known to cause a stroke. Pause the webcast, reread the text, and write your adjusted definition in question 2 in the Think session. And then continue the webcast after you've written your response. Here's the third text. At the end of the bay was at first glance I thought was a huge domed building, but then saw it was an excrescence from the cliff itself. Pause the webcast, reread the third text, and write your adjusted definition in question 3 in the Think session, and then continue the webcast after you've written your response. Here's the final text. The wart, a small excrescence on his skin, has made Jeremy self-conscious for years. Now, pause the webcast, write your adjusted definition in question 4 in the Think session, and continue the webcast after you've written your response. So by now you've probably settled on excrescence meaning something that sticks out or protrudes. This building of understanding of the word through texts will help students remember the word and be able to apply it. It's much more effective than my giving the students a vocabulary list on Monday to memorize and regurgitate on a test on Friday, right? After I went through this process of building meaning of excrescence, I made connections because that's what an English teacher would do with related words. The first one I thought of was excrete, and then excrement, and crescent, and increase, and crescendo. It would not be my first inclination, it would not be the inclination of most of my students to do this, but by modeling curiosity about word relationships with students and demonstrating how to break them down, it's important, and I can create a love of finding common roots among the students. In addition to the need to grow vocabulary, we also need to grow knowledge. Consider the fairly well-known baseball study in which 7th grade students were tested, and they were divided into 4 groups. On the top row are students who are considered in the high reading ability group, meaning they routinely tested in the 70th percentile or above on comprehension texts. On the bottom row are students who are considered in the low reading ability group, that tested in the 30th percentile and below. So then these students were asked to rank their knowledge of baseball, self-assessing how much they knew about the sport before taking part in the study. Students who ranked themselves in the high knowledge of baseball group, that is the 70th percentile and higher, are in the groups on the left, and students who were considered themselves as low knowledge of baseball are in the groups on the right. These students were then given a passage about baseball and asked comprehension questions about the text. Consider the grouping and answer the following questions about what you think the results of the tests were. Please pause the webcast now and answer questions 5 through 8 in the Think section. When you've finished answering, continue the webcast. Here are the results. Please pause the webcast now, take a look at the slide, and then respond to question 9 in the Think section. When you've finished your response, continue the webcast. Thank you for recording your reflections based on the results of the study. The fact that the high reading group in the 70th percentile and above and the low reading group in the 30th and below tested nearly the same is significant and demonstrates that knowledge has some important implications for us as teachers. First, could it be that sometimes when we think we are measuring comprehension, we are actually measuring background knowledge? And second, doesn't this study reveal the vital role of vocabulary in understanding the text? Think of all the terminology associated with baseball that would trip up a person who didn't know anything about baseball. There's line drive and balk and steal a base, fly ball, strike out, safe. All of these have different connotations within the context of baseball. So what all this information means then is that students do not have a reading level, but many reading levels depending on the content of the text. So rather than using reading levels to determine reading for students, an idea would be to help build their knowledge and vocabulary by assigning reading that's purposefully related. And sometimes we assign around topics like animals or inventors, but we should not discount the idea of grouping texts around universal concepts to allow students to also make abstract connections. When considering a topic or an overarching theme or a central question, it's helpful to use an approach that requires educators to consider various aspects to find the best fit theme for their students. The first consideration is endurance. Is what I'm asking my students to learn important for them in life? Is it something that I feel is worthy of their time and they're going to carry that skill or that information outside of my classroom? Next is leverage. Does the learning cross content areas? Are these transferable skills involved in that are going to help my students in other classes? The next consideration is readiness. Will this learning prepare my kids for what I know is coming up for them next year? And finally, we have to look at external exams, whether we want to or not, right? Is what I'm asking them to do going to help them be successful in common assessments or required state exams? A perfect theme or question or topic would take into consideration all of these. Let's consider this grouping of texts. I think it's important here to note that this text set was designed by a teacher in Arizona, and the study of water and the water supply has special significance in the desert states, so it would certainly fit into that endurance real-world requirement. The text set author has included books and articles, but also a video, an infographic, and an interactive calculator. This list of related text and non-text media is grouped together to help build knowledge and vocabulary in a systematic approach. But as important as the grouping of text is the sequencing of the texts. The text set author's order of text is demonstrated in 2 columns, and it begins with an article with a 760 lexile with 573 words. Next is an infographic, and this visual is presented early on to provide access to the topic through pictures, allowing struggling readers to gain knowledge without the barriers of lots of words and difficult structures. You'll see that the video is next, again allowing all students to gain some background knowledge in the topic before being challenged with heavy reading. But then, oh my, look what happens here. We're moving from a 760 Lexile to a 1010. And we can do that because we built up background knowledge. We now have some schema upon which to hang some of the weighty words that we'll encounter in this complex article. The next text, however, goes back down to a 790 Lexile. Why would we drop that Lexile after we've built it up? Well, as you can see, the TextEd author is now building some stamina, moving from 583 words to 48 pages. Gradually, the Lexile goes up, and then, oh my, again, here we are at a 1070 Lexile. This set exemplifies a research-based success-success-stretch model that helps students not become frustrated. We don't want to just flop incredibly complex text in front of kids without making sure they're prepared to tackle it. Finally, you'll see that the author has provided an interactive calculator in allowing students to make the learning meaningful by asking them to imply that knowledge. This grouping and sequencing is one way to make text accessible for students. Text sets employ a mixed media grouping method. Text set creation begins with a fulcrum text, one that is on grade level, complex, rich, and layered, that students will likely not be able to fully engage in themselves. If students can read all the text we assign them without us, without scaffolding and support, then what do they need us for, right? Why would we assign it? We need to focus on that challenging text as our end goal. We then consider context texts and texture texts, which are print and non-print items that will help prepare students to be successful when presented with that challenging fulcrum text. We might consider Emma Lazarus's The New Colossus poem, the fulcrum text for our 4th grade class. We know they'll need some context and some vocabulary for them to fully grasp all the nuances and levels of meaning beyond simply decoding of that text. So we might provide students with the interactive Scholastic website that allows kids to choose from several students who are their ages from various countries to share their own stories through video about immigrating. We also might have students participate in a reader's theater, which is a play about people who are immigrating. There are a couple of photographs here that we might use as texture texts. There's no reading of words in these pictures, which allows struggling readers to enter the conversation. These photos, particularly paired, offer opportunities for rich discussion and critical thinking, adding to the building of contextual understanding necessary. And then students, hopefully, should be able to prepare to engage in that deep reading of our fulcrum text, which is Lazarus's poem. We've discussed purposeful grouping and sequencing as ways to help students access complex texts. In Part 2 of this module, we'll look at various evidence-based strategies that can help students make meaning of challenging texts. Please enter your reflection in Part 1 of this module in the discussion section, and then move on to Part 2. Happy reading!